Hey, what's up, everyone? Hope you're doing good. This is update 9.5.5, and while it doesn't reinvent the game or flip the sandbox upside down, it absolutely cleans up a ton of rough edges that players have been bumping into for weeks now. One of the biggest things I want to get out of the way early is how much of this update is about consistency. Bungie clearly went through and looked at all those little, wait, is this supposed to work like that moments, and just started checking boxes. Activities are a big part of that. Several objectives that weren't tracking correctly have finally been sorted out, which means things like invasions, kills, or completions that used to feel unreliable should now count the way you'd expect. If you've ever finished something and stared at your screen wondering why your progress didn't move, this patch is aimed directly at that frustration. Lighting and visual fixes also made it into this update, and those don't always sound exciting on paper, but you absolutely feel them when they're gone. Certain areas were either way too dark, oddly washed out, or had visual effects behaving strangely during encounters. Those have been cleaned up, which makes fights feel clearer and less distracting, especially in activities where awareness actually matters. On top of that, a few physics-related issues were addressed, including enemies or objects behaving in ways that felt more accidental than intentional. Weapons got a fair amount of attention here too, particularly perks. One standout fix is the All-Star perk, which was not behaving consistently across different modes. Bungie has now locked it in so that it behaves exactly as intended, with a strong damage bonus in PvE and a more restrained one in PvP. That kind of clarity is important because perks like this directly influence build choices, and nobody wants to build around something that turns out to be bugged. Enhanced All-Star also had its special ammo behavior corrected, which brings it back in line with expectations, rather than feeling randomly better or worse, depending on the situation. Another perk fix that a lot of sword users will appreciate is opening salvo working correctly again with swords. This was one of those things where veteran players instantly noticed something felt off, and newer players probably just assumed it was normal. Now it's back to functioning the way it was designed, which gives swords a little more reliability in both burst damage moments and planned engagements. Abilities across all classes also saw some important adjustments. Controller players, in particular, should notice that activating Prismatic Transcendence feels more reliable now instead of occasionally refusing to trigger at the worst possible moment. Supers got some cleanup too, like Mobius Quiver correctly removing its buff if the super gets interrupted, which prevents unintended advantages and keeps things fair across encounters. Lightning Surge interactions with Bolt Charge were clarified and fixed so the behavior and the description actually match, which is a small change that goes a long way toward reducing confusion. Movement-based abilities weren't ignored either. Grapple Tangles had some animation issues that made them feel awkward or inconsistent, and those have been smoothed out. When movement is such a huge part of how combat flows, even tiny animation problems can make the game feel clunky. So this is a welcome improvement, even if it's not something you immediately notice unless you're really paying attention. Progression also quietly got a meaningful boost. Gear from the Edge of Fate can now drop above 300 power, which matters a lot for players who are actively pushing their level and don't want certain activities to feel pointless once they hit a ceiling. It keeps more of the game relevant, and that's always a good thing in a system built around long-term progression. Raids and dungeons weren't left out either. Some long-standing issues like overlapping music, enemies failing to despawn properly, and loot not appearing correctly for previously attuned players have been addressed. These aren't changes that suddenly make content easier, but they do make it feel more polished and less prone to awkward moments that pull you out of the experience. On the UI side of things, a few incorrect kill attributions and menu display issues were fixed. Again, not glamorous, but incredibly important. When the game tells you what killed you or how something happened, that information needs to be accurate, especially if you're trying to learn or improve. Collections also got some love with sorting fixes, icon corrections, and even a renamed emote, which helps keep everything feeling organized instead of messy over time. Overall, this update feels like Bungie tightening bolts rather than adding new decorations. It's the kind of patch that doesn't generate massive hype, but you absolutely feel it the longer you play after it goes live. Things behave more predictably, systems make more sense, and a lot of small annoyances just quietly disappear. If you're the kind of player who values stability, clarity, and consistency, this update is doing a lot of work behind the scenes to make your time in the game smoother, even if it doesn't shout about it the moment you log in.